The most misunderstood dinosaur in history. You have almost certainly seen this dinosaur before, even if the name is hard to pronounce at first glance. The image is unforgettable. A small dinosaur with a rounded head shaped like a thick dome of bone, lowering its skull and charging forward like a prehistoric battering ram. In movies, books, and documentaries, the story usually plays out the same way. Two of them face each other across a clearing. They scrape the ground with their feet, then they run. Bone slams into bone with a thunderous crack. One animal collapses while the other stands victorious. It is a dramatic scene. It feels powerful. It feels believable. For decades, this became the accepted identity of Pachycephalosaurus, the so-called dome-headed dinosaur. But the deeper scientists looked at the fossils, the more uncomfortable that famous story became, because almost everything people think they know about this dinosaur may be built on a misunderstanding. Pachycephalosaurus lived during the late Cretaceous period, roughly 66 to 70 million years ago, in what is now North America. It was not a giant like Tyrannosaurus or Triceratops. Compared to many dinosaurs, it was relatively modest in size, reaching about 4 to 5 meters in length and standing on two legs. Its body was built for movement, with long hind legs and a stiff tail that likely helped with balance while running. But the feature that made Pachycephalosaurus instantly recognizable was its skull. The top of its head formed a thick, rounded dome of solid bone that could reach more than 25 centimeters in thickness. Lying surrounding the dome were small spikes and bumps that gave the skull an almost armored appearance. When early paleontologists first studied this structure, the conclusion seemed obvious. A skull that thick must have been used as a weapon. The idea spread quickly because it fit neatly into a familiar pattern. In modern animals, structures like horns, antlers, and thick skulls are often used in combat between members of the same species. Bighorn sheep crash their heads together during battles for dominance. Some species of goats and antelope do the same. It seemed natural to assume that Pachycephalosaurus behaved in a similar way. The dome looked like the perfect helmet for head-to-head collisions. Soon, the image of two dome-headed dinosaurs smashing their skulls together became one of the most famous scenes in dinosaur storytelling. The museums displayed illustrations of these dramatic encounters. Children's books described them as prehistoric fighters competing for territory or mates. The narrative was simple and exciting. A dinosaur built to ram its rivals with unstoppable force. For many years, that explanation went largely unquestioned. After all, the skull really was incredibly thick. But paleontology does not rely on imagination alone. Every theory must eventually face the evidence preserved in fossils. And as more Pachycephalosaurus skulls were discovered and studied carefully, scientists began noticing details that did not fit the headbutting story quite as neatly as expected. The first clues appeared in the patterns of damage found on fossilized skulls. If two animals were charging directly at each other and colliding with their domes, most injuries should appear on the front of the skull where the impact occurred. Instead, many skulls showed signs of trauma along the sides of the dome. These were not tiny scratches. Some were deep lesions and healed fractures that suggested significant contact had taken place. But the placement of these injuries raised an important question. Why would the sides of the skull be damaged if the animals were smashing into each other head-on? Another puzzle emerged when scientists examined the neck structure of Pachycephalosaurus. The vertebrae in the neck did not appear especially specialized for absorbing repeated frontal impacts. In animals that headbutt today, the neck and spine often show adaptations that help distribute the enormous forces generated during collisions. Thickened bones, reinforced joints, and strong muscle attachment points help protect the brain and spinal cord. Pachycephalosaurus did have a sturdy neck, but some researchers argued that it did not appear robust enough for frequent full-speed impacts. A direct head-on collision between two large animals moving quickly could generate tremendous stress on the spine. If Pachycephalosaurus were truly ramming rivals with all its strength, such encounters might have been extremely dangerous, even fatal. That possibility forced paleontologists to reconsider the traditional image. As the debate continued, scientists looked more closely at the internal structure of the dome itself. At first glance, the dome appears like a solid block of bone, but detailed analysis revealed a more complex design. Inside the dome were layers of dense bone tissue arranged in patterns that added strength without making the skull completely rigid. This internal architecture suggested the dome could handle pressure from certain directions while still absorbing some impact. But it also indicated that the structure was not simply an indestructible battering ram. The dome was strong, but it was not meant to survive unlimited force from every angle. Some researchers proposed that instead of charging directly into one another, Pachycephalosaurus individuals may have engaged in a different form of contact. Rather than a frontal collision, they might have pushed or struck sideways, bringing the side of one dome against another in controlled contests of strength. This interpretation fits more closely with the injury patterns seen in many fossils. High side impacts would naturally produce damage along the edges of the dome, rather than at the very front. These encounters might have resembled a kind of ritualized shoving match. Two animals could circle each other, making contact with their domes while trying to push the other off balance. The goal would not necessarily be to cause severe injury, but to demonstrate strength and establish dominance. Similar behaviors occur among many modern animals, where displays and controlled physical contests decide which individual holds higher status. These interactions allow conflicts to be resolved without the extreme risks associated with full-scale combat. If Pachycephalosaurus followed this pattern, its thick skull may have been designed to endure repeated contact without catastrophic damage. Another important clue comes from the evidence of healing found on several Pachycephalosaurus skulls. Some fossils show lesions and bone growth that indicate injuries occurred while the animal was alive and later healed over time. This means the individuals survived whatever caused the damage. If they were regularly slamming their skulls together with lethal force, it would be surprising to see so many signs of recovery. Instead, the injuries appear consistent with controlled impacts that were serious enough to leave marks but not usually fatal. Over time, repeated encounters might have produced scars and healed fractures, creating a record of social interactions preserved in the fossilized bone. The more researchers examined these details, the clearer it became that Pachycephalosaurus may have been misunderstood, meaning the dome was still important, but its role might have been different from what people imagined. Instead of functioning primarily as a weapon of destruction, it may have served as part of a complex system of communication and competition within the species. Visual signals often play a crucial role in animal behavior. Bright colors, elaborate horns, and unusual body shapes can convey information about an individual's strength, maturity, or health. The large dome of Pachycephalosaurus would have been impossible to ignore. It rose above the skull like a helmet, instantly visible to others of its kind. A larger or more developed dome might signal that an individual was older or more dominant. In this way, the dome could have acted as a warning as much as a weapon. When two individuals encountered each other, the shape and size of the dome might communicate information before any physical contact occurred. One dinosaur might decide to back away simply because the other appeared more formidable. If conflict did occur, the thick bone could protect the skull during pushing matches or glancing blows. But the primary function might have been to prevent fights from escalating too far. By clearly displaying strength, the dome could reduce the need for dangerous battles that risked serious injury. In many animal societies, structures used in competition actually help avoid constant violence. They allow individuals to settle disputes quickly and move on. This possibility changes how we think about Pachycephalosaurus entirely. Instead of a reckless fighter constantly crashing into rivals, it may have been part of a social environment where signals and displays played a major role. The dome was not simply a weapon but a statement, a visible marker that helped establish order within groups. It might have influenced mating opportunities, territory disputes, and interactions between individuals of different ages. Young animals may have had smaller domes that gradually thickened as they matured, allowing other members of the species to recognize their status instantly. Understanding this perspective highlights an important lesson about interpreting extinct animals. Humans often project familiar ideas onto creatures from the distant past. When we see horns or thick skulls, we imagine dramatic battles because those images capture attention. But evolution does not always favor constant aggression. In many cases, it favors efficiency and survival. Avoiding unnecessary injuries can be just as valuable as winning a fight. The features that look most intimidating may actually exist to keep conflicts under control rather than to cause harm. Pachycephalosaurus reminds us how easily appearances can mislead us. Its skull looked like a perfect battering ram, so people assumed it was used exactly that way. But fossils tell a more complicated story. The patterns of injury, the structure of the neck, and the internal design of the dome all hint at a behavior that was more nuanced than simple head-on collisions. Instead of violent crashes, there may have been controlled displays and measured contests of strength. What once seemed like a symbol of prehistoric brutality may actually represent a sophisticated way of maintaining social order. There is another reason Pachycephalosaurus may have relied more on display than constant physical combat. In the late Cretaceous ecosystems where it lived, survival depended on conserving energy and avoiding unnecessary risk. Injuries were incredibly dangerous in prehistoric environments. A broken limb or deep wound could mean slow starvation or vulnerability to predators. Even a strong dinosaur could quickly become prey if it lost the ability to move properly. Because of that, natural selection often favors behaviors that reduce the chance of serious harm. A thick dome that signals strength from a distance may have allowed Pachycephalosaurus to resolve many confrontations before they ever became physical. In that sense, the skull functioned like a visual warning, announcing that this animal was not an easy opponent. When all of these possibilities are considered together, Pachycephalosaurus begins to look less like a prehistoric fighter and more like a dinosaur built for communication and controlled competition. The thick skull still had a purpose in physical encounters, but those encounters may have been carefully limited rather than reckless. Evolution tends to reward strategies that balance power with survival, and Pachycephalosaurus may represent that balance perfectly. Its dome projected strength, protected the skull during contests, and helped individuals recognize and respond to one another without constant violence. The dinosaur that once seemed defined by head smashing may actually reveal how ancient animals avoided the dangers of fighting whenever possible. When we imagine this dinosaur now, the scene changes. Or instead of two animals charging blindly toward each other, picture them approaching cautiously, heads held high. Their domes catch the light as they circle, each one evaluating the other. Perhaps they make contact, pushing and testing strength for a few moments before one decides the contest is not worth continuing. The tension fades, the conflict ends without serious harm. In that moment, the dome has served its purpose. It has communicated power, resolved a dispute, and allowed both animals to walk away alive. This new understanding transforms Pachycephalosaurus from a prehistoric brawler into something far more interesting. It becomes a reminder that evolution often builds solutions aimed at balance rather than destruction. Structures that look dangerous may actually exist to prevent danger from escalating too far. And in the complex ecosystems of the late Cretaceous, that balance could make the difference between survival and extinction. Pachycephalosaurus may therefore deserve a very different reputation than the one it carried for decades. Instead of being remembered only for smashing skulls, it may represent one of the most misunderstood examples of how dinosaurs interacted with each other. Its famous dome was not simply a tool for violence. It was part of a system that helped manage competition within its species. And sometimes, the most remarkable evolutionary adaptations are not the ones that destroy rivals, but the ones that keep the peace.